Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to another special Idea to Value podcast interview. I'm very happy to have Brad Barbera with us today. Brad is an innovation strategist and the author of Keep Innovation Simple. Brad, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be on.
So for people who haven't seen you or the insights that you've put on social media, can you give us a brief background as to what you do and how you got there?
Oh gosh, how I got there is kind of not exactly the straight path that I thought it would be when I started out. My very first job out of college was in the much coveted role of mayonnaise engineer for Kraft Foods, and at the time, fat-free was the thing because fat was the nutritional enemy. And trying to make something that is, mayonnaise is like 75% fat, and you try to make that fat-free. Was a bit of a challenge, but I was a co-inventor on my first patent for the process for making that stuff. And then I had the experience of seeing somebody actually pick it up off the grocery shelf and put it in a cart. And I was completely hooked on innovation from that point forward. Most of my career comes through the R&D side of things, where I've developed products everywhere from foods, obviously, and cosmetics and personal care items to ergonomic office products and candles and home decor items, just a whole variety of things. I also served as executive director of the Product Development and Management Association. There I got to work with some of the great thought leaders in innovation and product development. And then most recently, I've been on my own as a consultant, mostly focused on small and mid-size businesses and nonprofits as well, trying to help them innovate and systematize the process they use for innovation so that they can do it on a very consistent basis.
I mean, you've mentioned so many world-famous companies there and different industries, and I think one of the things that I love when I speak with people like you who've got a very diverse background in innovation is that you and me probably have similar experiences seeing that different companies kind of need to approach innovation differently. Do you think that there's the perfect formula for innovation, or do you think that it does vary from company to company?
You know, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to give an answer that may sound actually kind of contradictory. I think fundamentally the principles for innovation are the same whether you're developing a pharmaceutical product or a candle or a noisemaker or a rubber chicken. There are these fundamental underlying principles that are true, and I like to seek out the evidence of what those principles are. What is the research? What does the research show that says, okay, yeah, this really works? But then you're absolutely right. You have to take those fundamental principles and tailor it to the specific needs of an organization, an industry, a country where they're operating, whatever it might be. So you can't it's not just a carbon copy of what somebody else might be doing. It's got to be very personalized and it must be, what's the word I'm looking for? Customized for a particular organization. But the principles remain the same each way.
So if you look at some of the most innovative companies that most people would think off the top of their head, the Googles, the Apples, the Toyotas, the Teslas, they're obviously very innovative and they've got their methods of doing their work. Is it not just good enough to learn from the best, see what they're doing and bring it into your company?
I absolutely think you should learn from the best, but you shouldn't copy the best. And that's what I think is a huge mistake that a lot of people make, especially when they start throwing around terms like best practices. oftentimes best practices are, oh, well, I read this book called This is the Apple Way, or this is the Tesla way, or this is the Amazon way. And they think, well, I'll just go do that in my business and it's going to work. I think the example of JCPenney recently, where they tried to be the Apple of clothing stores, and it didn't work out so well for them. You can't just take one thing from one place and slap it on top of something else and expect it to work. You have to, again, there's those principles, there's things to learn, but you have to tailor it to your own needs.
But why doesn't it work? Have you got any insights as to what might prevent something that's working really well in one company from having an equally good effect in another company?
I think it's very much like everybody is an individual. We all have our own likes, dislikes, capabilities, backgrounds, experiences, that sort of thing. Each organization is made up of human beings, and the human beings at one organization may operate in a very different way than the human beings in another organization. Apple, I think, is a great example. I mean, you can look at the success of Apple, and I'm kind of Steve Jobs out, if you will. I mean, everybody loves to say, "Oh, well, Steve Jobs did this." I'm not Steve Jobs, and those people aren't Steve Jobs, and they're not in the tech industry, or you can't just say, "Well, that's the way Apple did it, so we're going to do it that way, and it's going to work." They just have different capabilities. They have different inputs. They have different customers. It's all that's where you have to customize and focus on what is right for you, and not necessarily what worked for somebody else.
And how does this fit into what you talk about in your book, Keep Innovation Simple?
So the idea behind my book is to take some of those evidence-based practices, those fundamental principles, and try to teach people what these principles are. What does the actual science say you ought to be doing that will tend to make you more successful with your innovation efforts? And then try to help them understand, get into deep self-awareness. What is it that I can do with these principles? What is it that my organization can do with these principles to make us more effective?
And let's go through a couple of them then. So let's start at the individual basis. You mentioned that everyone's an individual, everyone's different. What sort of things are going to affect someone's ability and capability to be innovative?
Well, I think that's where there's a series of things that people need to be aware of within themselves, and understand what they're capable of. And also understand just in general how human beings work. One of the things that I've learned over my career is that innovation is a human activity done by humans for humans. And if you don't understand human beings, you're going to have a really hard time innovating. So you need to start off, I think, first and foremost, understanding how the brain works. And our brains are fantastic machines. They're truly incredible, but they're also somewhat fallible. And some of the tools that the brain has used to help us survive over the years can also backfire on us. And there's a lot of recent research around cognitive biases. And I think the best thing somebody can do is start off with understanding what these biases are and how they can set you off track if you are trying to be innovative. Some of my favorites, I call it the dirty dozen in my book. The confirmation bias, it's probably one that people are most familiar with. And it's the idea that your brain will only allow information in that already fits how it thinks about the world. And if you're not aware of that, you will miss out on so much that could allow you to change the world, to change how people perceive things. And that will obviously interrupt your ability to innovate on a big level. One of the other biases is self-serving bias. And my favorite example of that is if you read any annual report by a company, everything that goes well for the company, well, that's because we just had wonderful strategies and flawless execution and great marketing jobs and all this kind of stuff. Anything that goes wrong, well, that was because of the weather in India. It was because there's a solar eclipse, and it was all. Anything goes wrong that's somebody else's fault. If you are approaching everything that way, you're never going to be able to learn what you did right, what you did wrong. That ability to learn from failure is going to go away. You'll just blame the failure on things that are irrelevant and only accept that you did wonderful things that led to success. So that's where I would start is with cognitive biases, and then start trying to develop the skills that can help make you more innovative. The mindset that I like to think about when it comes to being an innovator is respectful irreverence. And what do I mean by that? Respect means you understand and know how something works. You understand why it was made that way. And you can understand that, hey, this was really a great thing. But the irreverent part, you can't revere something to the state where you then say, well, we can't touch that. I actually have a strange view of the new Coke fiasco from a few decades ago. I actually would hold that up as something Coke did in a way kind of well. Yes, they screwed up with regards to customer feedback, and there were a lot of lessons from failure to learn on that. But the fact that they had the gumption to reformulate classic Coke formula is amazing to me, because there's so many people would just say, oh, we can't touch that. And so they had that, certainly they had the respect for it, but they had the irreverence to say, you know what, we can change this, and maybe it will make us better. So I give them big kudos on that.
I think that's a good example of, as you say, a company that had the gumption, the balls to try out something that was really risky. And that's where a lot of companies seem to fall down a bit. Or a better phrase might be fall backward a bit. They try and go forward, but they keep just falling backward into their own patterns, into what they know works, and they have this real risk aversion to try out something that might fundamentally change their business. And
absolutely.
And you need to have a certain degree of tolerance for getting shouted at if you're going to be an innovator.
Absolutely. I call that you have to be willing to play whack-a-mole. And be the mole. You have to be willing to stick your head up out of the hole and say, hey, we ought to be doing this, and be ready for people to start beating you on the head, trying to pound you back down because they don't want to do that change. I actually had the experience, I won't name the company, but I had the experience of working on a new technology that when we consumer tested the new product, it actually tested better than the classic. And this was just a process thing I was working on. We weren't changing formulas. And we actually got the word to change the formula to make it exactly the same as the original formula. We had to basically downgrade because they didn't want to take that risk of a new Coke sort of experience. It is hard to change, especially when you've had success. I think there's a curse that goes along with success, and it prevents us from making things even better.
Let's go back to the title of your book, which is Keep Innovation Simple. And it's this simple word that I'm quite interested in. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll first start off with what I don't mean is easy. Simple is not about making things easier to do. It's about having clarity and focus on the kind of things that really need to be done. And again, kind of going back to that fundamental principle, I'll use an example that I think everybody can relate to, and that's trying to maintain a healthy weight. That's absolutely simple. You eat right and you get some exercise. Could not be simpler. But then you go to a Barnes and Noble, and the bookshelves are lined with different diet books and different exercise regimens and videos and all of this kind of stuff. because it's hard. It's not easy, and yet it's incredibly simple. And I think innovation needs to be very much like that, where you need to focus on these principles and then do the really hard work of figuring out how that applies to you. One of the things that I pound on with both with my book and with every client that I work with is you need to have a real mission, a real core purpose. And I'll be the first one to say that I think 99% of corporate mission statements suck. They are, excuse the language, but they're bullshit that they just put into posters and frame around to, make office wall decorations. But nobody actually lives the mission. They don't live that purpose. So I pound on everybody, you got to have that real mission. I mentioned earlier, I get to work with a lot of nonprofits, and one of the cliches in the nonprofit world is that nonprofits need to learn to run more like businesses. And I'd turn that on its head. I think businesses need to learn to run more like nonprofits, where they have a clear mission of what they are trying to achieve in the world. And it can't just be, oh, I want to have, high return on investment for shareholders. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, gosh, I want to give a high return on investment for a shareholder today. No, you want to do something great. You want to have meaning in your life. And that's where the mission comes in. And that's that simple part. Create a mission that motivates people, that people believe in, and focus relentlessly on achieving that. Really hard work, and can be really complicated, or really complex, I should say, because there is a difference between complex and complicated. But it's the kind of thing that keeps you focused on what you absolutely need to do to be successful.
What do you mean by the difference between complex and complicated? And does it got anything to do with how you approach innovation as well?
Absolutely. I kind of felt like I stuck my foot in my mouth there when I used the wrong word. The world is a really complex place. I don't think anybody would argue with that. And I saw a T-shirt that has kind of my innovation mantra on it. This was years and years ago, but it said, "Love chaos, hate confusion." And I think that should be every innovator's mantra. The chaos that is all around us, that is innovation opportunity everywhere you look. The confusion part of it, though, is what you really have to eliminate. And the best response to complexity is to have simple principles, simple guidelines that help address the particular problem you're going after. What we tend to do, though, because it happens to be easier in the short term, is make complicated solutions. So we see there's this complexity that there's 10 different problems that we're facing. So we're going to have 10 different solutions that we're going to paste onto each one of those problems and hope that they all somehow magically work together, rather than thinking of it in a very systematic, a very holistic way and saying, what is the one thing we need to do that's going to address all of these things?
So unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of the interview. We could probably keep talking for hours and hours, but there's one last thing that I wanted to talk to you about. And your company it's called something like Pi Innovation, or a 3.14 innovation. What exactly are you talking about there?
Thank you. I get that question a lot, and it actually has nothing to do with the number 3.14. There's a book called Serial Innovators that was written by some of my favorite academics, and a portion of it identified the mindset of innovators, and they called it a pie-shaped mind. And a lot of people have heard of a T-shaped mind, where you have on the top bar of the T, if you will, a lot of broad, shallow knowledge in a wide variety of areas, but then you have really deep knowledge in one area, and that forms the vertical post of the T. The letter pi, Greek letter pi, is kind of has that same crossbar, but it has two deep areas of knowledge. So you have that broad, shallow knowledge. You have very deep knowledge in some sort of technical areas, and I won't get into what the definition of technology really means. I have that argument a lot. But you have that deep knowledge in some technical area, but you also have deep business knowledge. You have awareness of how organizations work, what organizations need to survive and be successful. So that is a pie-shaped mind. And what that enables these serial innovators to do, that broad, shallow knowledge allows them to make connections in a wide variety of areas. They're fishing one day and they come up with an idea for, automobile tires. They make these bizarre connections that other people can't make. That technical knowledge allows them to think of ways to actually execute on the ideas that they get. And then that business knowledge allows them to understand how this can actually be made in a way that will get out into the hands of the people we're trying to serve with whatever the idea might be. So it's this pie-shaped mind is something that contributes to their ability to innovate on an ongoing basis. And so I named my company after all of that.
Wonderful. Brad, it's been wonderful having you here today. If people want to find out more about you and get in touch, what can they do?
The easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is very creatively named bradbarbera.com. So www.bradbarbera is BARBERA.com, and you can find all about the book, my services, and whatever else you'd like to see there.
Brad, it's been wonderful having you here, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a joy, and I hope we can do this again.
Today's episode was made possible by members of our premium Deep Creativity Training Program. For less than the price of half a candy bar per day, you too can get world-exclusive daily exercises which push your creativity past its comfort barrier to make you better able to generate ideas in all aspects of your life and work. Invest in yourself now by going to www.ideatovalue.com/deepcreativity and using coupon code PODCAST for 25% off your first order. And don't forget that if you found this episode interesting, to like and share it, and to leave us a review in your favorite podcast player. See you again in the next episode.